Continuing, ends of ages. Other places were Bloodland, where Clavin Wars were meted out, that the Supernatural series is based off of, and other cryptozoological sites that have updated databases from some actual creations and ancient things that we've seen. So these were like monster-type creature-like cemeteries that were marked with certain stones, and more bloodshed happened there. Times Beach was where people went Looney Tunes. They had been exposed to this flesh-eating virus that was basically eating them alive, and their faces were melting off. So we had to come into the situation and receive injections and stay alive. And this is really got the imagery for like the zombie farmer with like bib overalls and a pitchfork that he's carrying from, for these toxically infected farm-like people who were running around basically just trying to stay alive and coming out of their houses, defending the town, defending themselves, and attacking others, like, because everything was basically perceived to them as a threat at this time, because their brains were rotting. So the town was then cemented over, and toxic materials were covered up there. So I was driving around in a black car in circles around the top of this area, and the cemented over roads that were dirt roads, to eventually forget about it. And Fort Leonard Wood became a checkpoint for training that involved different types of centuries, decades, different epics, eras of strategic warfare training, like say how you would fight a battle in the 1600s, how you would fight a battle in the 1700s, how you'd fight in the 1800s, going back to the basics. And then in the Dark Ages, it was going from castle to castle, and opening a portal in different capsules, and then appearing in different types of capsules. And then you would hone in and then bring those types of skills and training and technology back into older time periods and see how it would work, and what did work, what didn't work, and whatnot. So then soldiers back then were labeled centurions, and then battled obstacles coming out of the woods, usually from the right side of a forest or in like lowland areas. Different plateaus, different types of land, like prairie land, places with hills, bunkers, different types of fields and scenery and geography. And then Sentinel programming was at Vermont, and Sentinel Rock, where there was stationed different types of Illuminati brain surgeons and heart surgeons that would have technology going from the brain to the heart, experimenting with suiciding these soldiers with E2K, just voice to skull technology off of cliffs, getting them to try to walk off cliffs while they were stationed down in docked in a boat down on the water, and other interface technologies that would make them feel robotic, like Sentinel. They call the Sentinel type of programming to be able to access and utilize technology that would have the ability to pull people at different junctures out of their bodies, and then make them recognize like overlay patterns of AI and like robotic overlay patterns from their voice. So it was a very disassociative tool and technique at this time. And then to be able to recognize that AI interface through voice recognition and patterns and sequencing. Because there is technology that could pull people out of their bodies and manipulate like soul, manipulate spirit. Because Kingdom of Darkness saw creation, they know how the human form and template was basically forged in the fires of creation, so they can make composite parts and holographic parts. And if you don't have the discernment and the spiritual shielding to buffer all that stuff, then you're gonna have a hard time struggling with it at first when you come full blown face to face, like interfacing with this type of demonic technology. But on the flip side, all this technology can be used for good, depending on whose hands that it's in. Using to heal through lasers and other things, through higher vibrations and plasma. So there's also another place called Eureka Springs in a Basin Hotel, and kids had to fight reptilians at this point in the hotel, which was the most haunted in America. There was these interdimensionals that were sealing the porches on each level, of this place, and they had structures in the walls, and on the bottom floor of this complex, they had an opening going from a hotel room into the hill, the cliff, and then into the cave systems. So they were trafficking victims from this Basin Park place into the cave system. So we actually had to rescue some of the people and children that were kind of like stuck inside of this one tunnel. So the guys that were there in black suits and hats really did not like this. And they would stare down from the Basin Park, looking up at us in the hotel, just like they wanted to kill you. They covered up this wall partition too to hide evidence of victims being taken into the cave wall systems and underground areas, and places where we had uncovered and rescued victims from the hotel rooms and tunnel walls. So very unfriendly spirits and interdimensional body hijacking went on there for quite some time, and many things hidden in the graveyards there and the grottos. The grottos were full of abominable things deep down below into this maze system and unholy graveyards. Also part of a morgue and people that were experimented on and buried underneath the hotel from this crazy doctor that looked like the doctor from the movie The Burbs. And it was basically a pool of dead energy zones down there, and there was these grates that you could look up at, and the moonlight would stream through from above, and it was Nosferatu style, very vampiric. Things would be coming out of holes in the caves, and just appear randomly, even in the daytime. So they called this place the Ghost Recon Ghost Asylum Night at the Crescent in Eureka Springs, and very strange things were seen there. There was also a church that was in front of the Crescent, and it was very Aryan ran. And there was also two houses back, way back, that were built that were very huge, not really mansions, but big, huge houses. And tech was also taken back in different time periods back there, and types of like plastic surgery done, and the doctors still continuing in different time periods to do experiments and surgery on people in these two houses. One was pinkish and one was purplish, and then those two houses eventually got burned out. But the old pilgrim-looking church is still sitting in front of there, overlooking the valleys of the city. So in the Crescent, there's also a lot of documentation of spectrals. Hauntings, things following people around down hallways, and then you stop at like a staircase or a certain mirror, and they wanted to get basically publicity type pictures, so these spectrals would follow certain kids, and they'd have camera waiting and then catch the spectral, the ghostly figures that were following certain children that were in that place, because they wouldn't just come out and follow anybody. It was just certain kids sometimes that would do that. That would be really evident in the light spectrum. So down into the tunnels from that place, go down into the city complex system, and there was these tunnels where moonlight would be hitting through different types of grates that would look up into the city areas where moonlight would stream through. Then you go into certain deeper parts of it, and you end up like sliding into mud holes. And some of the kids almost slid into the mud holes around one corner, and it looked kind of like a mud labyrinth down there in the grottos, and it had all these decaying walls. So there was very, very strange supernatural nights there, where you could actually see in one of these parts the ground is cracking open, and it was like a pit of Sheol, of Hades that was opening up down underneath there, because the ground was splitting open, and this place, like I said, was built on a morgue where doctors experimented horribly on people for decades. This went on. So then what we saw down there was these mud people that were looking directly at us, crawling through the mud, like they had their hands out, but they sounded like they were underwater, like they were in this water portal type of wall behind this dimensional barrier. So then you slide right into that area and then stop and skid because you didn't want to go past that water portal area, and it was basically a trap system down there because they knew what would be manifesting down there. And these people were in league with types of vampire clans because they had two statues of Joseph and Mary down there at first, and then they had chiseled off the faces of Joseph and Mary and put a different type of statue emblem that would mark the grottos down there. Because it kind of at first looked like a Catholic type of place, but then it eventually showed its real face when you sit down there in the grottos by yourself and get to know the system down there. So then by the time we lived in Crescent, they had documented many things in their scrapbooks already. There was nurses that came in one time from Texas that formed this KK formation. It looked like they were standing in two different types of Ks in front on the steps together. There was many sounds coming down from the valley of the fog, even from the woods, especially from the chapel. Shapeshifter witches there and their cats were always in every floor of the hotel. So they would recognize you in spirit and try to threaten you. You'd walk past different types of graveyards that had actual statue markings, but a lot of the saints that they marked as statues were graveyards too. They would put those on top of the dirt to make it seem like it was a garden instead or something. So the ghosts there lingered for a very long time there. They hated the kids there because they knew that the kids that were sent there were capable of driving them all back to the abyss and the humans that they had affected and possessed. So there was also a very commonly known perverted spirit there at Basin Springs Park Hotel that was documented as sexually assaulting women at night there too, and that's part of the ghost tours that goes on there. But the real things that should have been documented were the children that got rescued from the trafficking that went on in the town. There's also pictures of some of the time travels that were documented with 2 or 3 of the guys that were holding up 2 of the women in basically like a carriage buggy instead of a horse. So the time periods were very boring back then, so they took pictures like that of people doing comical things or things that they thought would be humorous or funny, like carrying women in a horseless carriage, and the guys carrying them instead being full of chivalry or something. So the doctor at the Crescent eventually, he had gotten busted, he got dealt with what he was doing in the houses. So the place was kind of like a horror house Black Ops apartment building that was standing in front of the Crescent, and those that were involved with the Black projects and participations in these areas. Like I said, plastic surgery was done in these places. John had had plastic surgery done. And what happened in there is that he had witnessed many individuals being in this type of like apartment type house in different periods of time, like assigned parents that were also getting plastic surgery or getting rid of certain kids that they were assigned to, making heinous decisions to erase themselves or their kids out of any evidence of them even being there, or their involvement or information that was collected from their experiences at this particular point in time. And he had gotten into an accident with a truck coming back from an assignment, and so he did reconstructive facial surgery, which took a very long time to heal, years. Because if you weren't valuable enough, there were gruesome choices available for your exit in these operations, and sometimes that seemed like the only option for many, choosing the lesser of the two evils, keeping your hands bloody while still being used, which wasn't really a choice at all. Because Matthew 16:8 gives you the choice to walk away from those who live in darkness. It tells you to leave the blind guides alone, because the Father will uproot them, replace them, and all their false promises that they offer and lies that they spin in their spider webs. Because our minds can be washed clean of any of these traumas and choices. So after being taken in the grotto, seeing the mud spirits, their hands reaching out space, their voices being basically muted. I'm not sure if they were just spirits or if they were animating dead bodies that had already been down in these systems. We couldn't understand what they were trying to say or communicate. That's okay. They were behind the burial wall or frequency wall that they couldn't trespass. Like they were underwater. So, and it was surreal but yet shocking to the core at this moment. Because in situations like that, you had to act fast. You had to know that you had guns covering or you didn't. You had to propel yourself backwards very quickly sometimes, or move at an angle, especially in water fights, very quickly sometimes, so that you could respond, react in time to save your own skin, or else remove somebody that was standing next to you. Like a handler, say, that would be standing there just sinisterly, smiling at you, watching the situation, seeing what you would do. Sometimes you had to like push the handler like into the stone wall very fast to get yourself hightailed out of there and back onto solid, stable ground. Because you didn't want to be lost down in places like this. It was as if sometimes they were stationed in places and corners and trapdoors to just meet you there, to want to like push you into certain interdimensional openings, in a sense to kind of cast you to the pigs of hell for good. So your heart would race, you'd be panting by the time that you'd get out of these tunnels. And then sometimes they would set up, like, say, people that were like fake Christians who would meet at certain points, that were worshiping in vain, making God to their own image, clones planted into church systems that were just Satan's creations and seeds. Those that teach the doctrines or the commands of men instead of being called, commissioned, and directed by heaven, because they don't own the sheep and they'll be judged first. After this, me, Cass, and John had a similar, we found out in like a schematic vision that we had a similar soul matrix and thought patterns form. So we had set like a safety type of mechanism backup plan. The programmers recognized this when they would scan children's dreams and other scenarios. So we each told each other in our little triad that we could share each other's memories as like a backup plan, just in case. Like if one of us fell into deep amnesia or something drastic happened, like if one of us would actually die or be taken off the earth or something. We had set up like different types of backup plans. So we were braided, quantumly entangled in a sense that they use this ability to pull each other, each one of us, back into trying to figure out what we knew, what we didn't know. But we used it to back us and pull each one of us into correct timelines, alignment, and into total recall. So basically when the programmers knew that we had this ability to have like a open source sharing system with our minds, they used to try to jam or scramble and confuse our brains in a chaotic way to keep our programming intact. And sometimes they would do this to like mix up your memory with, say, somebody else's. So then you had to sort those things out. So John ended up relying on this type of memory bank viewing too much, and then his brain was basically stuck in a lab for a while, thinking that others' experiences were his own, and not sorting and sifting through the real versus the fake. And then when that happens, you get an intermingling of artificial timelines and opening doors through misguided and misdirected AI temptations and openings, and then you create schisms in timelines. And then it's harder to straighten those out. So we went to this other little town that's called Berryville. It was a very odd, little dirty town on the outskirts of nowhere. The head people that were buried there was a man and a wife in these huge stone tombs on top of the ground, and they had built a cage fence that was put around the structure with marked gravestones. Then there was these sunken, moss overgrown, broken other pieces growing into the ground. So it's a very odd scene, and you go to this town to see like all these broken, huge, lengthwise gravestones that are just overgrowing into the ground, and they're all busted up. And there was a leader of a Claven ring there, because we knew where all the other rings were going and the heads of these basically. So then an old man ended up being in the St. George Hotel. It's also called the Grand View. And we ended up fighting him in that hotel. And the smell that was coming from this hotel was so bad that it just wafted out into the streets. The windows were like a fortress back then, and a prison for many, because the windows back then were 15 inches of thick brick stone lined windows. And some of them had bars on them. So you could just shut somebody like in a window and nobody would even know that that they were back there. And then there's also secret passageways and doorways in this place. So the man that was in there running this hotel at the time was like an old body consciousness that had the ability to body jump. And he was like a loose, grabbing, decrepit reprobate of an old man. So at the very end of the 302 place, we ended up at the bottom of the staircase banister when he was the only one left in this mansion. And then at the bottom of the wooden staircase, I grabbed what I thought was in a split second a swordfish statue, but actually was a dolphin at the end of the staircase. That guy ends up getting hit over the head with that statue when his last attempt at attack came. And then people later came back into this mansion-type hotel, tried to recreate it, tried to renovate the whole thing, put this dolphin statue back on the exact place on the staircase, put everything back where it was. But the place is still very haunted and it's just clustered with orbs everywhere. These old groups would go and they would run places from town to town, and we had them all mapped out. So at the tail end of all of this thing, we're basically the cat's meow for the day, walking down the street at the 302 square, and the people that ran this establishment ended up serving nothing but catfish that they would put on the advertisements as fit for King George. So then about 66 events started transpiring. And Route 66 was supposed to be Route 62, and there's many different places that were lined along the way of Route 66. So one time we ended up fighting the ghosts of these serial killer Native Americans at this clown hotel in Nevada. Another time we were with the CIA agent who was taking us to like Yeti Bigfoot area deep in the woods of Oregon. We were in a one-log cabin that drove down the road. Just a little one-log cabin that was used for a couple days. So I'm not sure what town this was called in Oregon, but it was an address in a one-log cabin with a full table inside, and a guy comes in, just sitting at the little diner table. We're eating candlelight dinner. When his fingers, you looked at like the fingernails, you looked at the eyes, you could kind of see different like light arrays before people were going to shapeshift. Yellow started coming out into the atmosphere. The nails started elongating a little bit. The eyes were trying to hypnotize you. So the yellow is always like a signature for werewolf shapeshifting. Then the next thing you hear, way up on the hill, way in the woods, was like crashing branches, it sounded like crashing trees. The Bigfoots make this noise, and sometimes it's like they're actually like uprooting roots of a tree and throwing them down a hill. They're very territorial. So you hear up on the hill, this Yeti come down, looking like it was just throwing logs. The camper gets filled with this sick yellow light. one log cabin. John couldn't see very well. He started driving the one log cabin down the road. I was trying to maneuver myself around this other fight. Werewolf Bigfoot fight. Okay, so the Yeti ends up hanging on the door of the one log cabin that was flapping open, like opening and shutting down the road. John and I were in the front seats trying to drive down these country roads in the middle of the night, and you really can't see that far because some of these places are so far out in the woods and it's very dark. So it was sounding very insane by this point. And Bigfoot could jump, like I said, pretty far, grab the door, the sides of the one log cabin. The shapeshifter went flying down the road. But at the end of these experiences, we still to this day know that the Yetis, the Bigfoots, were always protectors and the stranger things around them, except for the fire hybrid ones that were used against us that came out of a mystery cave on the Buffalo River. They climb out, and then that later ended up getting fenced in with steel gates and fences blocked off. So next morning, the camper gets returned, the one log cabin, the door gets fixed, that's put back in its place. And some things that people need to know is that werewolves, other creatures, can take over a reprobate human mind or body or clone and frequent certain time corridors. Fallen angels do the same thing too. They're looking for reprobated humans. The Vatican has an archive of this and has the manufactured beings actually on spaceships. Because there's the first heavens, the legions that are keeping charge over this type of like astral and interdimensional warfare, subduing the first of hell's legions daily. And then there's the second heaven and the third heaven up to the seventh heaven. And it goes down the same rank with the first hell down to the seventh hell. So we saw that the bodies that they could jump into is something that we could recognize as specific and certain entities. And this reminds me of the worst one that shows up in the Supernatural series with the yellow eyes. They call that demon yellow eyes. We saw the same type of thing with bursts of that yellow type of energy. And it's also amalgamated with the tech in the body so that it can give them supersonic hearing, like a cybernetic port to broadcast frequencies through, and other bat-like features or abilities. These, again, are Satan's creations, and it's only with discernment of the spirit that you can see who's operating behind these body forms, and even smell them sometimes, like they can smell you. So you have the heightened senses as well. But the stronger that you get in Jesus Christ, those senses will become heightened too. And a quickening of the mind and a quicker reaction time just automatically happens, inadvertently even. And there's even been visions that people have had when the Messiah returns, stepping his foot down on the Mount of Olives, his giant foot, because he's going to be radioactive since he's been with the Father so long. And the mountain will break in two, like the clefts of the rock will break in two, it says, and then he'll walk out, and there's visions that he will actually just be able to smell us, if your life is a good fragrance to him or not. And each one of our lives has a fragrant appearance to it, and we're known by that. And he'll just not even be able to have to speak to us when he steps out of that mountain, and just speak to his children by sensing them and drawing them into him, those who have already abided into him. And then he'll be able to rule and reign on earth in the new kingdom. So seek first after the kingdom, the word says, and then all the things shall be added unto you, all the things that you desire. So the Messianic reign is where our thoughts, where our hearts should be positioned for seeking his face in that. He's the good shepherd that stands at that door, waiting to be opened. And a lot of people in this time have time-locked information in them. Sealed information, like the scriptures say in the book of Daniel, the Torah codes. Things are sealed into people to be released to God's timing, on his calendar, for his purposes, and his plans. The sealed end times information in books, it's all happening now. The lost books that were taken and omitted out, that were the much needed for the end times remnant that they actually have to seek for and uncover. Because the pride of the Sadducees is what took those scriptures out. They didn't understand it for the time, wasn't for their generation, so they said they weren't valuable. So that leaven, that pride, ruined the whole loaf. And then it was hidden in 3 measures in the loaf as the kingdom of heaven now. So the elect know and are finding each other and understanding how to study, how to show themselves approved, how to hear the Father's voice, and see his signature, his hand moving in things and in other people, to validate other true prophets and to push aside the false ones that don't have his voice, that don't have the Good Shepherd's voice, or the glory and the anointing of the Shekinah cloud that will be seen on people's faces as they gather more and more in these times. So it's like seeing energy signatures and then a veil being taken off of the word, not just in the King James Version, but in every book that he has instructions for children to delve into and peruse on the earth. Because all the things that Yahushua did could not even fill every library on the earth because there's so many. And it's only us that limit his power and put that Godhead and triune nature, the identity of it, into a box. And then try to control the Holy Spirit, which makes us more of an outcast when we do that, if we don't repent of doing that. Because Yahushua HaMashiach is the foundation stone. We're the living stones in him that are coming together, that he's inhabiting, building the temple with, the cornerstone. We're literally housing the temple of the Holy Spirit on earth right now and setting the foundation and the forerunners for the kingdom of heaven to create a new heaven and a new earth, because he's coming to live with us. We're not going to live with him. So he's going to set up his house on the earth, for the earth is renewed. And he's set apart many groups and people for his purposes, and it's his, or ultimately his story that's being told, not even ours, because he's the head of everything, not the tail. And through us, we make the tail, like the Amalekite tail, eventually disintegrate and disappear for good. When that last serpent of Leviathan is slain and all evil is put to rest completely, which will be at the bottom of the ocean, getting down to the real swamp, the real bottom of everything. And then all the elements dissolve, the mountains melt like wax. His foundations of the universe is what he created. He knows everything and holds the universe in his hands still. This world's plans are beyond what we know of, and any ordinances handed down to man that are ordinances of heaven is the ones we need to take heed to. And the higher ways of creation, or the way, the truth, and the life, and the followers of the way will follow his spirit. Set up their treasuries in heaven, know the seasons of wisdom, the season in which he's coming back in, and the secret places that they can go to draw near to him. And then he'll reveal to you more of the secret places that were formulated in the dream that he dreamed of creation. When he dreamed this universe into existence, he wrote the books of creation. And he reveals those mysteries of heaven as in being like the secret places that people can peer into through vision with him and traveling in the Spirit safely with the Father or the Son or the Holy Spirit. So we're emanations of the Father's holy dreams that he sent here for his greater designs to all come together, be pieced together at this time. So still in his hands he holds the etchings of creation. He's inscribed it in the palm of his hands. He holds the ultimatums still. The ultimate senior intel core past any faults this world has of intelligence, really. And all this information warfare that people are literally dying for daily. His word is above it all. It stands above it all because it is the foundation. His word is what covers us, what keeps us together. It is the ultimate weapon and tool that the children of man need to survive and endure to the end, because when you have the word written on your heart, it shines light out of your being, and it automatically will repel things like, even if you wear scriptures on your clothing, that has a power in itself to rebuke. double-edged sword to divide the spirit soul in two, asunder. Another thing were time bubbles. These areas are created on the floors of the ocean and other places where they can open interdimensional warfare, Stargate openings, like in an abandoned town or something. It's kind of like cloaking tech to not cause code disturbances. So it's kind of like capstones in sealed areas to keep like a demiurge energy in place. And many times, these black projects do this, and they open up interdimensional warfare breakout units and areas, and this causes like a ripple effect into all other elements and kingdoms on the earth, because it's like throwing a stone in, say, a river, and that causes a ripple to go very far and very wide, and at some subtle level in the collective consciousness, people are feeling those vibrations. So it's a delicate balance of interplay that they have been experimenting and mapping out for thousands of years, since the time of Babylon, and when the intergalactic Tower of Babel fell, and how to recreate some of these ways that they would systematically operate and open up types of like black holes in areas and other things. And it's a snake type of worship still, because it's just opening up like an Ouroboros type of serpent type energy to be able to operate with their low level vibrations in different realities and dimensions. So we understood the types of celestial mechanics that were shown with angelic councils. The three kids that I spoke of at the beginning that were like kind of like an angelic triad. We saw like the impact on a higher level in the spirit realm of what happens when certain spirits operate in certain areas. It creates like a vortex and a cloud. They saw like sparks, stars, dimensions, elements, soft breeze overlapping, being translated through time that looks kind of like a comforting blanket, and how energies overlay each other. And what it also looks like is a trajectory mark that assails past anything corruptible. If you see something organically translated in time, it gives you like this brief moment, this glimpse, a window of opportunity to look into the halls of eternity and what joy everlasting would look like. Because things are translated in time streams here, but it's just on a very minute level. It's not being translated for eternity into the kingdom of heaven or anything, or translated like Enoch was to be taken off of the earth in a chariot of fire. Little moments open up here where people are translated in a time, say an accident, or to go from place to place. And even pastors have had testimonies where people saw them in spirit in two different places at once, doing the same type of sermon. Say they're in Asia, and then they're seen in another area, or broadcast through the video camera. So we saw lots of things like that happen. We wake up in unfamiliar surroundings sometimes, have to calibrate the mindset and the body, children's bodies, the best that you could to understand what the purpose was that you were there for, what was the assignment, understanding what you had to do. One instance, John and two other kids ended up in a different group of kids after being translated, like so many other times. I mean, even Thecla is described as being translated in the scriptures, but where they went was a foster home. This home ended up being an old school type of trafficking ring, with possessed individuals that were in different houses, doing rituals with the kids around fireplaces, chimneys. John gets thrown down the stairs, has a big goose egg on his head. They lock kids in doors, hallways, put them in the attic closet. Three little girls ended up being saving from this one particular house and from disappearing entirely. Sometimes they would find crawl spaces in these mansions and houses to go into, ways of operating these rings. And how it's evolved now into how the deep state operates them, the heads of state that are involved with that. So they would trap kids in different areas, basements, terrorize them in different ways, put them in different uniforms, conform them to what they wanted them to be, act like chores they wanted them to do, kind of treating them like objects, because that's the slave mentality. To make somebody think what you think and reflect what you are. So the kids would be sent off to school in a buggy, in a place where they were being trafficked and hurt. And they did this in the early 1900s in cars. The kids that came into situations like that, the super soldier kids, were already skilled at this point. They knew how to defend their bodies, how to defend their minds, how to teach other kids to fight. And it was easier for them to go into situations like this way before Montauk, because they could have the ability to defend their little bodies and know what to do in situations and how to act quicker. So the energy in this one particular place was so thick it just became like a black type energy goo that was coming up the sides of the walls. And the black goo has been around since the times of Babylon. It would manifest in many different places, even in people's bodies. You could stand outside houses, see it in a tree, see it in different areas. How this energy got purified in this one particular house was a very tall angel appeared, walks into the chimney, puts its eyes right inside of the chimney, and then looks around inside the chimney and purifies the chimney. Because the things that were burnt in there, the rituals that were done in the chimney, all that energy had to be cleared and released and purified with holy fire instead. Because the areas that they operated in, even if they burned things inside of trees or inside of stone edifices, that energy can be reversed and can be blotted out and transformed with holy fire instead of their strange fire that they put in there. So then blackness, black goo, can come out of certain places. We saw it many times. Houses being cleansed, children's bodies being cleansed, black goo literally floating off like black dust particles off of them, cleansing the mind, washing the mind clean, washing away any filth, any abominable things that were done in certain places, especially fireplaces where satanic sacrifices were. Places that have been allowed to operate for too long, where they were burning there for too long. So what they would also do before this time period is that they would take ashes instead of just, like I said earlier, making the necklaces and just openly, publicly wearing the adrenochrome. They would take the sacrificial burnt ashes and they would put it in old things like, say, white wooden old barrels, and then put it like somewhere recluse, like in an attic. Okay, so or attic, sorry, not attic. But what would happen is that the leader of these places, they would go dip the hands in the buckets where the ashes were, smear the substances on their faces, and then that in effect would act just like modern day processed and synthetic or synthesized adrenochrome works. And they would smear it on their skin, and so then they would start shape-shifting, and then that would allow them to go into the violent mode attack. This man in particular had a hammer, a little table. He would chase kids up the stairs into a smaller attic space. Sometimes throw them down on like 2x4s when the house was being remodeled, I guess, and there was these weird open spaces in different places. Big cracks sometimes would form in the ceiling from these breakouts and fights. One kid had a cracked rib. So after certain assignments being sent into certain places, you could actually see future probabilities coming out of like the end result and end products of some of these places. And then it wasn't always bleak. There was always an end point. And you could see victory sometimes in the future timelines that were organic, like getting to see arrests, getting to kids rescued, taken out of places. We saw this at about 10 houses. It's hard to see that when you're kind of like in the field vision, being in a certain place like that, but being able to see the end result in the future victory of it is very, very satisfying. What also happened in this area is that in some of the houses in this little circle, about 10 houses, there was a gunshot, there was broken windows, there was a firefight with fallen angels. What they do with that strange fire is they can leave black marks that are smeared on stones. Stones can turn black and then start to have this like black mold rotting look to them, but it's not just in the physical, but that is indicative of spiritual decay. We saw one man that was possessed in a little white house that had fallen angel come into him, and then he went to this Christian college where they were having revivals, and he started a fire there. So there's a lot of chasing in this area, kids being chased into small ponds. The showdown that happened like in a sand parking lot with these types of beings that were running rampant and being allowed to operate in certain openings. They were smashing bodies onto this huge jagged stone walkway under a road drainway bridge area. They were running, they were getting trapped to leave the road under short, small tunnel areas. That they would close the openings to these storm drains, basically. Beings were inside this campus. That place eventually got abandoned. They were climbing the tower, like stone walls inside that had this huge, tall wall of like running water. There were beings that were scaling that wall, jumping around on the inside of this place. This place ended up being kind of like a teenage SS training center. Stephen King and other people were there. They had different types of events at night. It ended up being like a place also that a Korean cult had inhabited, and there was AI training done there. The kids would go to various different rooms. They'd have to put their heads down on the desks, classrooms, and focus on different scenarios, different timelines, how to change futures, how to change situations, how to ignore, respond, react, or disengage, or just disassemble any type of AI thought pattern recognitions and things like that. The kids would have their own personal escorts around the place. There was different sectors of it. They had people in a hospital unit where the kids also saw this toxic illness that had affected many people, and it was a lot of hospital beds, like on a third story. The kids weren't allowed to touch these people because of whatever. It looked like they had been infected with a type of like plague, like a future end times type plague. So the kids in this area ended up freeing other kids that were in a little white house. There were smugglers in those houses. They had ropes that they had used on kids. They were using cellar units to store kids into. The kids that escaped would get chased into drain tunnels that would run under bridges, roads. They would get surrounded on both sides by interdimensionals. So it's very exhausting. The kids managed to sometimes climb up the hill. Sometimes their legs would get cut, or they'd have like a claw mark infection on them. There were certain cues. Some of the assigned parents and handlers with some of these kids would drop them off in the parking lot across the street. There was always like cues to pass a certain tree or go past a certain building. They would put through like an obstacle course type situation, running around on different dirt trails, going for miles. John could jump over little bridges really, really fast, going down like certain creek runs and trails. That would just end up like at forks, dead-end roads, or this little pond area where you would be debriefed or have an injection of a different type of like a euphoric type drug, where you'd think that you would be in this great place. Say that until you were in Florida or some other place where you weren't. The scenery would just kind of fade out with like the billowing of the trees after that arm injection of euphoric drug. and then you would be taken out and leave the area, or have a plane ride to leave a different area. There was many days and time periods where they did the body entrapment days. Sometimes they put you in like near-death situations where, say, like weather warfare would break out in a certain place. You could wake up in a cloud body and then have a blizzard start forming. So then you have to know how to survive and how to freeze to death in a certain situation. In the same house, you would see, I don't know, just random like manifestations, like a reptilian man standing outside like a bathroom window at night, staring at you. Different breakouts of spontaneous battles, major spiritual warfare. Holes ended up forming in a lot of these houses, places, just destruction in a lot of areas. You see places where it looks like just like World War II happened in a lot of these places. And, they didn't just get abandoned. Many things happen, like major spiritual warfare. Like you see like busted up cement staircases, busted up wooden floors, huge gaping holes in like cement building walls, places that just seem like something terribly wrong happened there. Some of these places were spiritual warfare, interdimensional, Stargate opening places, and training centers. Sometimes there's even like red smears or stains on some of them. One place in particular is on the Buffalo River, and it looks like a stone portico area, kind of like a gazebo, but it was stone, and there's still a red mark on there from when I got spontaneously attacked from an interdimensional coming up from a trail in the woods, and the 3 kids I was with and the handler were just watching. So in this particular college area, like I said, major openings, major spiritual warfare and end times programming happened there. The kids would get briefed in basement control command center-like rooms that had computers. Another room you'd go into and get brain wipes that had a window in it, and that room felt more like a principal's type of office because you could see outside the window. And sometimes the kids were in different bodies, so they would have to recognize each other at a spirit level. In one of these eras, many of the houses had what's called the mansard style roofs, Queen Anne style in the time period. Hannibal, Quincy were very close to each other, so we called it the old Queen Anne Second Empire time period. This also has a spiritual connotation because it also has to do with like an otherworldly queen that the reptilians worshipped. Not just Queen Anne, the Queen Anne that we know in our history books. Some of these old-fashioned houses, like I said, the first presidential imperial slaves were way before Marilyn Monroe. They would be more like Quincy Adams type slave, or somebody in the early 1800s. One of the first houses was a pink stained glass house that had 11 windows and a woman standing in one window that looked like she had an umbrella, she was wearing a very old-fashioned dress. The fire pits always had these large steel peacock fire fans to them. So the peacock bird imagery, things like that were always used in like the very first types of MK programming from 1800s to into the 1900s. So some of the first programming that happened to Kate was up in an attic. Front of the stained glass window, pink stained glass window. There was a peacock in another window. There's lots of little lamps, like old-fashioned lamps, go up different staircases. It kind of looked like the Carson Mansion too, which is in California. Same type of like peacock bird imagery, fireplaces, stained glass windows. Some of the kids had to stand in certain places and fan the fire flames. What happened in this particular house was that there was a gang called So the first MK woman, presidential, alpha beta type programming was programmed to be like a thief for Sneaky Pete's gang. She would carry like a gun or a knife in the petticoats, stand in front of the mirror, in front of the pink stained glass, be kind of entranced and programmed with that type of reflection, mirror magic. Sneaky Pete was the Chicago gang. What they would do is they would abuse the programmed alter named Kate with the friends of Sneaky Pete in the gang up in the attic that had a bunch of old chests, like trunks and chests. And what those chests were filled with was loot from the Chicago rival gang time period. They thought this house was just like the most best house on earth. But it definitely wasn't. A lot of programming came from this house, a lot of torture with ropes, rape, almost hanging, spying went on from this house, and like programmed old school assassination type stuff. So through this time period, after experiencing that old school type of programming, choking through ropes, sitting in solitude, the stained glass windows, falling into agreements with the enemy by believing lies, breaking you with like the happiest memories of your life, time locking you into making good memories into a lie. Those were the initial splits of pain and trauma, so that you wouldn't go back, you wouldn't want to look further back into those older time periods to see things for what they really were, because then you would just kind of forget yourself in the process, develop some type of self-hate, and then not want to be reminded of who you really were. So, like I said before, they would try to erase any type of happy or beautiful memories with what they wanted to instill, like installing a program on a computer, because the mind works just like a file system and a computer and an accordion, because we're wonderfully and fearfully made. So there was an older woman there that would try to comfort Kate, bring her up into the attic for these programming sessions, where the trunks were with the loot from Sneaky Pete's gang. They made a comic book about this time period with a female super soldier character that was wearing tights, a top hat, had like a black cane. She was fighting on like special recon missions, where her lover John would locate her. Then she eventually became defragged with him and sort of became unfrozen in time. And then having to deal with the situation of just realizing what had happened, staring in unbelief, piecing together the complexities, the levels of depravity that you kept getting thrown back into. Intelligence was allowed to go into many different time periods. What they would do is that they would take you out of like a stuck time period like that, and then coerce you into getting memory wiped, like say after Quincy, where the first cabal was formed, Q-Town, where QAnon was formed, and somehow convince you to go along with them still, to cover up history and all these bad American stains that didn't belong in history books, and then they would lie to you and tell you, oh, it will never happen again. You'd have these like evil breakfasts at different mansions, different bed breakfasts. But still you were just surrounded in a den of wolves most of the time, over and over again. They had the same type of programming, old-fashioned clocks in these places and reminders that you had forgotten about that you get triggered by in different rooms, different scenarios, because you'd be going from one mansion to another mansion to another mansion. So then you would just want to forget it all, make it disappear, and make a better history for yourself, basically. So then you would just want to move and fast forward your life into the future until it was a blur, instead of fully having the time to process and deal with time translations, being translated in time. So Quincy was the national meeting place of the first cabal. It was not Washington, D.C. They had like all kinds of statesmen involved time period back then. So it was definitely a force to be reckoned with. Because nowadays it's um, more technology based, but it wasn't so much back then. Carriage rides would take like 3.5 hours to get from one place to another. You see the presidential Vita Monarch, MK Slave, puppets appearing in different places, in different rings, because they would, just as in biblical times, meet in the woods and gather in different places, especially mansions or very remote, woody places. Quincy Adams had pictures taken of him um, in various jumps. Other elite lords would also have you take pictures of them in, say, like sitting in a library or something else that would just like have a Smithsonian stamp of approval on it or something. And they did this to just instill that you were basically a time slave or something like that. Because they were very proud of the work that they did, and they would always look at the people that were their slaves like there was nothing they could do about it. So that by the time that the town of Quincy was left, there was many fires that started breaking out there, a lot of hiding of evidence. What me and John did was we streamlined into future computers and see into the internet and other things that were formed for cataloging purposes and timestamps and data and packaging. You could even go into future time streams and make, like, say, a Facebook page of, like, Quincy, Illinois memes or something like that. That would fit more into, like, 80s, 90s. So sometimes if you would look at data that was sent for a specific time period, it wouldn't really make much sense viewing it in, say, like 2020. Because it didn't somehow relate to the current decade. It was cataloged in like a data package for a much older time period, just to get the information out and to have that the energy released, so that it wouldn't be lost. Because nothing was lost, and that's the most amazing thing about all the Time Wars, is that nothing was lost. A lot of things on the internet have been prepared and made a long time ago and are basically just time-released data packages. So John Adams was a very demonstrable character, to say the least. What you could see in some of these very old types of men and people was these like black chunks of like sick, sticky type of energy that would just hang around them, like hang around their aura. And it was like something like flies would be hanging around you. And they always had a very sickening smell to them, like mothballs. You just didn't want to be around them. It would just make you want to vomit. And you could smell like the thick smell like copper iron in the air. That was eluding from them too, because they were blood drinkers. And the Lord says that anybody who eats blood, his face will be against them. So we saw like firsthand without electricity, just by candlelight and other things, like how these sick beings had deceived people through time and made themselves recorded in history as something that they weren't, when really they were just like these blood drinkers that in effect were basically rotting piles of shit. So you had to repel them most of the times. A lot of the people in the program would be transported through carriages, like I said, from various station to station to station, mansion to mansion, under mind control. You know, the girls would wear bonnets, men would wear like these suits. But what Quincy Adams looked like was kind of like a Green Goblin looked like in a suit, and they actually made a comic book character out of him as this type of character under a black sky with this lantern-looking light about him. He had these tights on under his suit. They were just repulsive. They treated the time slave like dogs. And what this first cabal did, which is different than the current modern day mansion rings, is that say like the John Wood's mansion, those types of places, they had different types of pantries, doors, storage rooms. They had children in ropes hung up in certain mansions even, especially in John Wood's mansions. There's many Skinner families too that lived up to their name, and that's why the name Skinner is also in the X-Files movies. This was later also recreated on a stage in the Carson mansion when the kids were transported there, and they had to participate in a play that was called The Barbarian of Ingomar at the Ingomar Mansion, which was just another very profane place, and they called it the Eye. So there's another huge battle with the Nazis that ensued there called the Eye of Ingomar. Well, I guess I can tell you about some of the rooms in Ingomar. One room is called Stephen's room. There's a kid named Stephen there who could repel the reptilians quite nicely there. Sometimes kids would come in just out of nowhere. They would be filled with the light of Christ. They would just come in, just take over, do what they did, and you'd be like, whoa, where did this kid come from? They were just like an inspiration. You could recognize if a child would come in with a certain energy pattern that you knew was a child of the Most High, under divine protection, under shielding, and had covering from heaven. So these kids would just be like an inspiration and inspire other kids to follow suit. Because so the other kids would just fold into the devil's work. They would be fear-based and act upon their fear more so than eradicating that fear. They had a green porch room too, where you would see like two people take you in there, and then their eyes would start turning red, like beady red eyes, and then this green sick energy would start permeating into this sun room, porch room. So you'd have to protect your mind, protect your head quickly from them latching on to your thoughts through those when the red eyes would manifest. There was also a Freddy Krueger looking house that was just bright red. Everything inside of it was red too. All the carpets were red, the walls were red, everything was just red in this place. Many of these types of mansions were just owned by certain individuals just for the purpose of staying haunted, taking kids into them, and were the basis actually of many stories, video games today, and a lot of horror scripts. So taken from various mansion to mansion. The Garth mansion was a very big one. That one had different clocks in it, and it was always like the same scenario in the Garth mansion. One of the rooms had big black curtains. There was a warlock in one room. Certain parts of these rooms were familiar, mind-wiping rooms. I was standing in a white gown once in the room with big black curtains, and the curtains on the wall just looked like they were like big nightgowns too. A lot of the ways they decorated some of these places were very confusing with the textures. So what you had to do with many of these types of mansion-range places is retain things on a soul level, because it's not always on a cellular level that can ensure that the information would stay, and that the information would be retained in you, and that the information could carry over into the layout of the next work at hand, and then into the final summation of the work that you were part of and at hand and fighting against. So Quincy had some other very old houses. These houses look like they were built in like the 1700s. One of the houses we called the werewolf house because there was a very old black book in there, and by candlelight, a couple times at night you could see a man inside opening the book, yellow energy shooting out into the sky from this old stony house. And we actually got to see some of these Dark Ages vampire or werewolf books that they were using, and they passed these books down from like family to family to family, and from house to house to house. So once again, again, we saw that like mustard yellowy type dirty energy spectrum coming through, charging up through his eyes. It's a very quick shift of that demonic intent. So it's like we saw the real Addams family birthed out of this area. We saw the same colonel in the army at the Garth Mansion, different types of military people. Also the same person at the Elijah McLeod's house in Washington, over and over and over. And there's pictures documented of it too. So the colonel that would always come in to the Garth Mansion, we could tell that he was also being used against his will in the Time Wars. What John would do is that he would come into that house, and sometimes you would be able to switch to see something through somebody else's eyes. So it's like somebody was having a very hard time, they weren't as fully like awake as you were. You could go into like a situation where they would be taken into that mansion, wake up in their body, take that risk, and then try to, while doing that, wake them up. So one time I was at the very top of the staircase. It was always the same staircase, looking down through the steps, the windy spiral steps, of course. And a lot of these houses had the oculus in the eye. I look down, I see that I'm wearing like blue jeans. That didn't really fit the time period, so I knew that something was definitely amiss in that situation. So then you wake yourself up in that body. You could keep track of what was going on, and you could get to where you want to be. And what happened is I ended up jumping down the staircase after seeing that blue jeans didn't fit that old-fashioned time period. So we get instances like that where it was pretty comical, where clothing and other things were like sloppily, details were sloppily overlooked so that it was easier to wake up. So you had to keep track. Different houses, different mansions, different time periods, different clocks, and tactics and techniques used for the mind control in different rooms. And each place had like a different set of rules, different assignments from each one. And then keeping that all together. We had many words that we had references to, like Pink Lady. That was connected to the Pink Lady stained glass mansion of the altar of Kate. John had an altar named Tom Waters. There was also like different types of dragon ladies that were at the Carson Mansion. This was also called the Pink Lady, one of the houses in Eureka, California, by the Carson Mansion. The two dragon lady type characters would sit on a couch with you, and then you'd stare out these big, clear, outline stained glass windows to like another castle-looking house, and they would try to get you to sync with them mentally in like this Disney-type-looking array and dream world that they would want you to stay into. And you never wanted to eat anything in these mansions that they would offer you on platters. Some of the kids were under an illusion or a spell, and they didn't actually see what was on the plate when they were offered certain things. And some of the candy was drugged. You just never wanted to eat anything from any of these places. There was also a witch lady outside of the Pink Lady house in like this Four Corners area out there that they had a system set up with. There was a large white picket fence. A black limo would drop you off in front of there. Sometimes you'd have a bicycle like it was a game and be chased by like this witch lady that would come running off the porch. There was also a butler character that would meet you on the red brick road in front of the Carson Mansion. Had white gloves on, which is a Freemason reference. Then he would lead you into the Eye Mansion as we called it. What we saw in there was more like dragon board archetypes living there. Like I said, my name first initially was Kate, used in the 1800s, early 1900s mob my neutral wars. John was called Bob Tom Waters and regularly visited this dock, the doctor in St. Louis. Many names were carved into the cave walls in Hannibal to remember all the Time War events, and going through the Mark Twain Cave Time Wars over and over again, coming out of the light tower, all the different scenarios that were played there. Guy sitting in a rocking chair outside of the Mark Twain Cave chasing you. It just seemed to go on for decades. So you'd carve different names into the cave walls to try to remember all the things that were going on. In the Time War Cave, Time War events, chronicles, and chronologies. Sometimes we'd even be in like actor or actresses' bodies at times, because before Hollywood they wanted to know what worked, what didn't work with the silent film era, and before radio, before TV, how the devil uses frequencies and did back then to be able to have his cloning games play and then come out onto the public scene. Casbolt was used in the Grapes of Wrath as Henry Ford. There was many like outlaw characters that we played too. There was Francis Farmer interplays, Lester Keaton, Greta Garbo. A lot of filming took place in Germany through that. And what I was shown is that heaven allowed the body jumps because the time terrorists were jumping from body to body, and you couldn't lose any holy ground with that. And it was like they had this AI script that would play out and try to convince you, say that there was like security breaches and squads coming after you to hijack your bodies, to live out as you, to devour your soul. We were told many times that they can kill your soul, which is a lie, because you can't kill your soul. This is a lie from the devil and his reigns, because we're going to fear the real creator of heaven and earth, who has the ability to kill not just the body but the soul. They can only manipulate and get you to say, lose your soul, hand over your soul, or to have your soul trapped. But the Lord can return your soul to you if you haven't gone too far, if you're not a reprobate. So we knew that we outranked the devil's legions. We knew that we had scared him off many times. We knew that we had scared off many of the devil's legions and workers. And we knew who the real Father of Lights was. And that he's the one who led your way back home through the stars, and that ultimately all souls do answer to, because he's the Lord of Hosts, the Lord of Souls, the King of Kings, the King of ultimate glory, that shines light on every soul, and nothing is lost, nothing goes uncovered or revealed, because at this time right now he's revealing all things, and he wants his wisdom and knowledge to flood this earth, just like his knowledge would cover the seas, and eventually the sea will be dried up, because the sea is Sheol and the marine kingdom, and that's going to be the last thing to be dealt with. That is Satan's favorite kingdom and stronghold, is the marine kingdom down there. So every soul will eventually find its way home, find its place, find its ultimate judgment and resting point, and come to its tail end. Justice and mercy do flow from the throne in heaven. So the kids at very early ages and stages had to derail any type of like fear scripts, any false narratives, any artificial narratives, and know that they were baseless and useless, void threats a lot of the times. Because if you're not giving that attention, not feeding into it, it's not going to work. What the devil wants you to do most of all is to not focus on the power of God, the redeeming, rescuing, delivering power of God, and just to be distracted and to focus on him. Because when you're focusing on what the enemy is doing, then you're not focusing on what the Lord is doing and seeing just how much greater he is in your life. So a lot of kids' strings were pulled in many different ways. They had to get through various games, chessboard type, interdimensional interdimensional games, 4D chess, seeing interdimensionals in human suits. But they knew, and I knew firsthand, that all of it would be halted one day and stopped abruptly. I could see the end to a lot of this stuff. And then we were also shown like sealed graveyards that are reserved for Judgment Day, reserved for the resurrection of the dead. This is where the whole vampire movies and stories and things came from, because the fallen ones they're just like vampires, just like werewolves, just like these creations that just seek to steal, kill, and destroy the human forms and get at our blood. Because the blood of Yahushua Mashiach, the Savior, is what redeems, rectifies all mankind, humankind, and back to Adam. Because he's the second Adam in the head of humanity that resurrected all of humanity when he rose from the dead and became the first fruits of the resurrection. Because he is bringing us back up into life, the resurrection of the just, the resurrection of the righteous. Because he's the ultimate righteousness and fulfillment of the law, fulfillment of Torah, and we become righteous through abiding in his body and seeing him as the head and knowing that he's the authority of our lives, our souls, our destinies, and all these other lower beings that try to like control our destinies and our fates. They get shut up, they get turned away. When you resist the devil, he flees from you, and so do they, and all of the little workers in those colonies. So what we've learned most of all is that it's really not up to us to reverse anything now, to take on the beast system ourselves, to make our own endpoint, our own final reality, create our own reality. It's not up to us to do any of that, or to go back in time and try to fix things. That doesn't work like that. That's all over with. All those things that happened, even in time loops and in timeline openings, peering into time doors and things that were pointless, that didn't bear any fruit. All of that is now and should be closed entry and exit points for the most effective time travelers. The Kingdom of Darkness, their game that they played through the Time Wars, their end game, has always been futile, and it's futile now. They literally, the people that are turned over to the strong delusion, the entities that still try to recreate the strong delusion, that would seek to go against the firmament and use any type of space war to go against the throne. These people who would try to recreate time tech, these people that would try to open things that they shouldn't and can't, they would literally have to war with angels, even the highest, holiest angels, to unseal certain burial grounds that are reserved for the resurrection of the dead. They would have to fight and war against the highest, holiest angels to unseal certain pits, things that have been buried, closed X points in time, to have certain knowledge that they still desire, that they just can't have, and that they would want to covet. It is a delusional desire in this sense, because they're seeking to go places that they can't and that they're not spiritually allowed to. So those that want a pure heart, want pure intent, this is why our desires and our hearts have to go towards the good inclinations and not be turned towards the evil inclinations, and our tongues have to be purified as well. What we also saw was things of denoting things about the seventh seal, the seventh sign, seeing into future timelines of Yahushua's end times warriors, gathering of the elect, the end times army, like a formation of like golden eagles being sent out of the nest, which you'd call like dread warriors. Guardians of the sanctum with flaming swords in their hands, watchers of the seventh flame. The souls that have overcome, they had expiation and mercies fallen them from heaven to sustain them and comfort them. book of Jubilees, Judah had tears of blood come out of his eyes because the power of God was so strong on him. And this is reflective of the crushing that his soul took to get the anointing that he had and carried, to be that mighty warrior. And a mighty wind ministry also had a vision of Yahushua crying tears of blood in the throne room right now, being prepared by the Holy Spirit to come back to earth and do what he has to do to justify the earth and then tread the threshing floor. He bled out of every pore in his body. He still feels that for mankind and for human souls. So that's another reason why we need to turn our face towards him, seek his face, lift our heads up to him, because Yahushua told us to pray while looking up to heaven and to have our hearts postured right so that our prayers are heard and answered and we keep abiding in his body so that we don't feed off of the flesh of the beast system but continue to feed off of him and his righteousness, because his righteousness makes us right and in right standing to stand upright before the Father, so that he'll vouch for us in the end. Because he says, if you deny me, I'll deny you before the Father. So I believe that the Lord in his genius sent time angels here to keep a certain grid work here, redraw many lines into his continuum on his calendar. No matter what the time wars did, messed with, manipulated, tried to erase his children out of existence even, all the little schemes, all the schisms that were created from the errors that kids made while being exposed to the time wars, all these things are being brought into correction for the ones that are still in good standing with him. The grid work, healing, their souls, their bodies, their minds, all being made whole in the same process. So many things are coalescing with the rhythms of heaven's work and Yahweh's kingdom, which is at hand. And a lot of information was stitched back into time, and many souls were tested for operational capacity for this time period that we're in and coming into in this event horizon. And a lot of those old mansions, they were called old world mansions. And this was before the 23-year time loop, because it really was like a different world back then. It's not just architectural associations, but also spiritual attachments to this world and off-world terminology, things that we saw. Because we saw like portals open up in the sky, beings going and being like sucked up into a vacuum up into the sky. A lot of the war in heaven was just starting from constellations. Giants fell from cities in the sky to earth. That war we still see, and as this world is coming to its end, we're going to see up in the sky more and more of the binary system, and these beings actually falling like stars from heaven and being shaken out of their nests like a fig tree. So like I said, Queen Anne's colonial Second Empire is a spiritual archetype that we had to deal with in the mansion time war rings. They made a book about me resisting some of these experiences and being taken to abandoned houses initially with a character called Demeter West. They had John mainly in a dapper suit, carriages, like he was a servant boy, and then like say if I was Quincy Adams in a carriage, who'd like take my hand and help me out of the carriage, but the handlers would just like rub it in your face, like servants at that time. Even if you were white, you were still servants to them. A lot of times I had curls in my hair, like a shawl around my shoulders. They had us on like a lockdown and a system, like gridlocked into their old system of transports, control, domination of situations, and other factors. There was one mansion in particular called the Miriam Mansion. Many places had MM initials or MMM initials. Also like Minden Mines. There was patterns of numbers on houses too, lots of 111s, lots of 101s. Um, some of these mansions looked like what you see in, say, Harry Potter movies, and I think that's where they got the inspiration for a lot of Harry Potter movies. Because of all the types of high-level witches and sorcery and warlocks that we saw in these places, they would use places like old funeral homes, places you know that are built on dead bodies. A lot of skeletons in the closet, literally built off of the bodies of children to feed off of others. So the windows in some of these mansions would be humongous portico windows, opened up different locks on them. Windows themselves had different types of geometry on them that would act as portals and then be used with the tech to be portals. Many of the children were afraid of a lot of the stained glass windows because of this. They would have to be put in the windows, stand there, like frozen dolls or puppets, like they were spell cast. Doors would open up like this too, and little doors and secret doors, and they'd make kids stand there in different places. There were many circles on the architecture, on the floors, on the ceilings, like Rotary Club symbols, but far more ancient. They had these big stained glass windows of the Skeksis bird worship. And what it represented was these unclean, caged, hellish birds that represented a type of fallen angels. And they had these two basic main stained glass windows, I guess, that were the most pertinent to this whole thing, in what I call the feeding room. It wasn't really like a living room. These beings would come in with like silver platters and try to get the kids to eat certain things that they said was chicken. First stained glass window of the Skeksis type character bird had fruit in it that was in a bowl, like a basket. And this reminded me of the movie The Grapes of Wrath. They would drag the kids upstairs, make the children stand in certain positions, freeze them. Some kids would hide under tables or chairs. They had huge furnaces in a lot of places. And it just kind of reminded you like of a demented Hansel and Gretel type story. A lot of kids were paralyzed in different places on tops, standing on tops of chimney areas even. This particular Miriam mansion was a morgue, so they had used some of their furnaces for incinerators. At times, you could actually hear a child screaming in the furnace below while you were standing in a window, say looking out in a rectangular window and trapped in this like geometric symbolic prison, finding it very hard to move your body around. And you'd see another child sitting out on the other side of this mansion, standing in another stained glass window looking back at you, while one of these creatures would go outside and stare at both of you. They had different shutters that they would close in different areas. A lot of these stained glass window areas would have shutters or doors that they would shut, and then it's like you would be stuck there for long periods of time. Some of them had 4 different locks and keys to open these things with, and they would just make you stare blankly at like a certain geometric symbol, pattern, image, or something outside of the window. You'd see children disappear through this high-level magic in these mansion rings at various windows and portal stations. There's different color patterns to a lot of them. The sequence in which they shut the shutters, things that they would say, and the tech that they used in certain patterns was like a 4-way system. One time, even in this like little alleyway, you get like chased outside on a red cobblestone path, trying to break any communication that had occurred between you and these kidnappers, because they had the ability back then to paralyze your spine, like your spinal cord. We were electromagnetic beings, and they knew how to do that. A lot of it is through the eyes. You have to break the lateral eye movement, control, and move your eyes in a circular pattern at first. So the kids that didn't get totally paralyzed by this, what they would do is that they would pretend to be frozen. They'd be stuck by a certain door, on a staircase, whatever they did. Then you'd have to sneak away, unfreeze other kids, and then try to move them out of like a shock type behavior, and then have them go into survival mode with you to get out of a certain room or a certain situation. So what I learned at the end of all this is that these beings came out of the Mark Twain cave. They were manifesting this reality. If you looked into their eyes, it was just like looking into the stained glass windows themselves. That their eyes seemed to be like a portal geometric system. That if you looked in their eyes, you could fall into, just like falling into the stained glass window trances. These things were very ritualistic. When you looked into their eyes, it was like you were looking into an astrolabe mechanical cybernetic feature that was of a deeply fallen nature because they were fallen angels. So you never wanted to look too long into their eyes because their eyes were cybernetic and they shift around in their eyes like cyborgs with these weird little sparks and shapes and like a strange fire to them. Like that was in the fire hybrid Yetis. And they used that to program and to put kids into the window stands with and to keep them standing there. So it was hard in the Myriad Mansion because you had to remember what each window area meant, what the shapes and colors meant to defeat them. Because their eyes spun inside, deep down in their eyes, like hellfire that was trying to bring you down into a portal with them. They're like soul siphoners, soul suckers. And it looked like the rings of Saturn were kind of going off kilter and coming unhinged through the madness that was in their eyes. And with that also came like an offset in its own set of frequencies and sounds and moans. When their eyes moved, there was actually sounds that came out of their eyes. And then, of course, they smelled because they had like a dirty bird-like feature to them too. So they would do these things and try to make you gravitate into them to be sucked into their type of spellcasting system. So it took very long periods of time, it seemed like several times, to understand the bizarre features these things had and what you were dealing with there. At the very end part of the Myriad Mansion, I was later put on top of the fireplace, what I called like the hell furnace. And what happened is that, this happened to me probably a few times. You receive the baptism of fire. And what you feel is, like I said, the black goo, the black ash, the other fire that was there, being eradicated, being snuffed out, being transformed, being transmuted. So my body was standing on top of the chimney that I was so afraid of before because I would hear screaming inside of this furnace. Because just like Hansel and Gretel, they would throw a child into the furnace and shut the door. So all of that black energy and tough energy and hard stagnant energy and particles, the angels would come in and actually purify in some of these places. And they were not allowed to operate, to do any of these rituals in these places again. They were cut off, and angels had to deal with some of these places personally. So what I felt when I stood on top of that was this burning fire inside of me, but it was very necessary and very purifying fire. I had tears come out of my eyes, my face turned bright red, and whatever I had absorbed on a soul level, and in my psyche and in my spirit at that particular house, that was so terrifying. I mean, I was even thrown off the bed by one of these things. It all had come off and became unhinged and disentangled, I guess, detached, and it was just purified with holy fire from my whole being. So I saw that whole process become eradicated, halted, stopped. And that was very satisfying in itself. When Heaven's Help came into some of these places, and Heaven's Help has come into bases, Heaven's Help has come into the Marine Kingdom. Jesus Christ himself comes down into the Marine Kingdom and saves souls every day that are imprisoned or trapped down there. And there's always work going on in hand. He is the deliverer and the rescuer of our souls. And the only one that can disentangle us from these quantum entanglements and help us not fear their faces. He strengthens our foreheads. He makes their disposition not seem so scary, so we can look at things for what they are and not run away from them anymore. And just go through and close and destroy and shatter any type of their scary spiritual imagery, doors, shut portals, seal things through his power, and make them become done away with. Because they continually kept on trying to go from place to place to place. So what happened in the Time Wars is that they were not allowed to function, to operate, and to do the same things in many, many, many of these places. It's just like the hunted became the hunted. And it was great to see those tables turned around, which is exactly what Q is still doing to this day. It's just like in a different form as it was back then. They can't gain the same type of energy that they were gaining back then, say in like these old-fashioned barns and the way in which they did things back then. It's like they can't harvest the same type of energy. So they have to use and rely on technology like CERN and try to open portals and try to do the things that they try to do now with quantum tunneling and all the other ways that demons can manifest through electronics and other things. Many things got shut down, and many victories have already been won, and that's what a lot of these super soldier kids need to be reminded of. So basically these beings, I don't even know how to describe them, it's like a big bird nightmare, is what it was. I later ended up coming back to the house, documenting it. The camera that I had almost started on fire, started burning. I had a battle with this male who was still in a body in that same house that was the lumber baron of the house that had formed a lot of these mansions, owned them, and built a lot of them, because the lumber barons ran a lot of things back then. So I was dealing with this very dark entity, this man who was possessed by the lumber baron, and this thing ends up like pushing me up into the ceiling rafters, which were like 9, 10 feet high. And many times you have to protect your neck so that your neck wouldn't be broke by these things. Break your neck free, your spinal cord from that electromagnetic attachment, and then be able to resist them or shut them down or just get away from them and escape them. These things are just, they're dead beings. They body jump. They look for places like this to inhabit, to haunt, and bodies to take over. And for children to stalk, of course, and gather. Because the main objective of all this is that they want to kill God's children. So a lot of these beings were kicked off planet from operating here, actually. And the demonstrable abusive tech also taken off world, not allowed to operate because the AI wanted to go before the Lord's timing and recreate reality, which he wasn't going to allow to happen. So we dealt with many different groups. Each group you would see different energy chains with, different things, like different families leave through different portals, going back to voids, spirits being killed, being sent back to the abyss, sent back to the pit, to be done away with forever. One of the main houses in this whole ring was John Wood's house. Big white house with pillars. It was like an old school Bohemian Grove type place, old school place. window. It had an eye on the top of the pillars in the triangle area. Um, John Wood was part of like a very old school type like bohemian grove. This man actually sacrificed his son Henry, and in the history books it says that two of his kids committed suicide, but that's not the real story. We ended up seeing the ghost of Henry, and that's where they made the movie Hardcore Henry out of this character, because when we knew what had happened, we gave this little boy named Henry, who had stood up against these groups, a title of honor. Like, you're hardcore, Henry. And we called him that because he had fought so hard as a little boy dealing with these monsters and seeing kids tied up in ropes and stuff. So John Wood Jr. later on went down in the original American history books as somebody that had committed suicide in one of these families. And the Skinner family married into this family too. There was old ancient entities basically jumping into these groups of people. One man was calling himself the Wizard Owl, the Night Owl Wizard. This is just a very old reference to Athena, Minerva, and Lilith, the Screech Owl, which we also saw in the Montauk Barn as Marina Abramovich, who would screech and scream like an owl in front of the barn windows with red drapes, and then you would see like a circle of demons fly out of her. So what these beings would do is that they would recognize you for who you are, see you, speak hatred at you, and then this man's head, who Lilith was in, would just like turn at you, and then the eyes would get really big, kind of like a screech owl. So we had encountered Lilith several times actually. And in the Camp Hero Montauk CIA faction compound barn, it was like the body that she was in the future was also amalgamated with Tech 2. So like the Screech Owl was way, way louder than what it was back in the times of John Wood's mansion in the backyard. And at that point in time, kids were put into stasis tubes with face masks and be forced to have their heartbeat slowed down and stuff, so much that you would be forced to pop out of your body, then astrally go into a clone through microwave frequencies, and then forced to do like obstacle courses through the upper story of that barn building. So a lot of these old archetypal things just manifest in different forms, manifest in different bodies. They use bodies for portals, basically. You can see different color array spectrums coming off of them. And it's like you're going to take the sword of the spirit that is just dipped in flames of holy fire and cut through them until like they're all gone. Because it's not just one. When you're dealing with these types of principalities, it's like dealing with Legion, because they gang stalk. They come in groups with them. So you have to be close to the Lord, understand what holy fire is, and as to be shown what holy fire is and how to wield it and utilize this aspect of that spiritual weapon, even like a rod of, like a white flaming rod, because we've also seen like black rods that are used as spiritual weapons by the kingdom of darkness. These spiritual weapons are very powerful. The sword of the spirit can split a spirit and soul asunder, breaking them in two and sending them back to their proper domain. And habitation, because everything has a prescribed order from creation that it has to adhere to. We also dealt with Lilith's counterpart, which is also Malak, that was sitting in the Biltmore basement mansion with an area that looked like it had a furnace like the size of an entire room. That was Malak's favorite sitting place, next to a rocking chair, was next to that furnace. Because these ancient orders have the same type of behaviors and habits. So if you see certain things like those specific types of fireplaces or altars, that's just the same type of family archetype that's operating. So in the John Woods mansion. There's a blue eye on the mansion pillars and a triangle. That was the first Oculus viewing type of gathering that was out there. And it kind of somewhat looked like the triangle at the first mansion that we were at in Hannibal. But these mansions have the same type of Oculus viewing going on now. Like the Bourne Mansion has a huge Oculus in it. It turns red, it turns purple sometimes. Many theaters had the Oculus at the tops of their ceilings, other masonry networks. And Stephen King writes a lot of books about this stuff too. And Stephen King wrote a book about this place that got shut down at the John Woods Mansion. So the first cabal, they would gather there at night. They had plans, statesmen, various heads of state, powerful people coming to meet there. Their goal started around 1777, wanting to layer and layer different types of plans for transforming this country basically into their sick version of Westworld, whose apex was actually at Eureka, California. So all these degenerates would gather at night. These gatherings come from like South Carolina, different states from all over the place to partake in these initial satanic power grabs. The Night Owl Wizard was like a man who kind of just looked like an owl. Some of the bodies actually take on like the appearance and the personalities of the spirit that's inhabiting them. Like say if like a shark entity would be very like bloodthirsty, very vicious, very cruel. An octopus would sit back and try to observe what you're doing for the next attack. Like reptilians have their own type of characteristics. You can see that in certain people. And spider entity. So what we saw was the embodiment of the Bohemian Grove owl, which was Lilith. And this man's head, like it would be like an owl. Like his eyes would pop out of his head practically. His neck kind of turned to you like the Exorcist, like an owl would. Like, what are you doing? We call him the Night Wizard Owl because at first this one was the hardest to. There was a lot of players in this game. One man looked like a vampire. He had like pointy suit cuffs. Another man looked like Frankenstein's son. These men were like the movie, what's that movie, Monsters of Men? They looked like gathering out in the backyard of some of these mansions. Some of these mansions had tunnels in the basement. Slave ropes that they used in the pantry areas, going down into basement steps, monsters and men type stuff. So what happened at this place was angelic intervention happened again. The place was not allowed to operate anymore. Screwed up their energy feeding, harvesting, shut it down. They ganged up on the kids that were there at night when they had their big gathering. The kids messed up their energy from operating there. They could not do rituals there anymore. It's kind of like a game of Red Rover in the backyard. Holy fire comes down, purifies the place, wipes them out. When all's said and done, the kids that were standing there in line were just elated because they didn't know what the end was going to be of this little gang up that happened at night in the backyard. So at the end, they were literally just jumping for joy. Heaven's hand had moved over them, been with them, over them, covering them, and had touched them. One of the statesmen that was trying to come after them looked kind of like a Goonies character, like a Goonies giant when you looked at his face and spirit. So I was in the middle of like this Red Rover type game in the backyard. What I did at the end was charged, ran. We were all very happy at the end, and I just lifted up my hands and shouted out, "Where one of us goes, all of us go." This later got forged into the plans of the QAnon movement, which has been 100 years in the making and in blueprints, and that's why it's been like a slow moving process, but is 100% real because it had to do with the Time Wars and it's intricately woven into the Time Wars. Some places were consecrated with holy fire, made null and void, so the kingdom of darkness and other places, they can literally not take back ever to, or go back to. They're abandoned spiritually from those things happening again, and a lot of these places are spiritually rotting. So Oz, the land of Mo, Disney, Twaniacs, timepieces in history. A lot of these places were met with heavenly force from continuing to try to shape and ruin America entirely and not make it into the freedoms and the liberty and the other things that were fighting back to make America great. A lot of diabolical scheming was working against this country initially. Certain elements, yes, still do exist. Many unwanted things, of course, through our culture and conditioning, but it would have been way worse if the Nazis, the Fourth Reich, and these types of beings and ancient archetypes would have had their way to try to take over the whole world. We're put through a lot of other different, very weird situations. In Georgia, there was a gnome village there. They had hanging cliffs. Handlers dosed the kids with drugs because they were psychic soldiers in their eyes. So they would make them run through different places like this to see all the elementals that were running around, coming after them. Seeing things like even like Papa Smurf, other weird things. They always loved to open up any type of spiritual doors and push the limits of anything that they could. The kids would run past the smoking pipe, witch face rock, try to pick up the drugs that they were on, always have their spiritual abilities tested to see and peer into other dimensions, see how their bodies could survive certain situations, just try to test the limits of everything basically. Being used as guinea pigs a lot of the times, being put through cave tunnels, opening drawers in caves, ancient things, ancient processes. Another place, Route 66, we'd always be taken to this place called the Blue Whale of Catoosa. There's a man, a handler that took me back there before it even became popular. There's two little orange lanterns hanging up, two blue kissing whales. A guy was sitting in the backbone of the whale by Fort Spunky. The man was a shapeshifter. This man tried to pull you under the water into the pond. Psylocke with you. A lot of tables would get turned in this place. A lot of attempts at drowning that never happened there. Before this was even a popular place, it was a place that they had tried to take you out at. There was a guy there that had a bunch of reptilians too, in a boat that was like called Noah's Ark. We learned how to fight in the water, how to protect ourselves from drowning in water, how to have a spiritual barrier formed in water, and to escape very scary water situations like this. So the Blue Whale of Catoosa was not a very good place to be taken to as a stopping point, I would say. After this attempt at taking you out at the Blue Whale, that whale just sat there for a very long time and had vines growing all over it. Its eyes looked really crazy. It was rotting in a state of decay. There's pond scum growing all over the place, and it just sat there abandoned for a long time. So then later on it gets reopened, fixed up, so it just doesn't look like this relic of a horror scene, which it was. And they repainted it, made it into a gift shop. There's lots of creepy places like this on Route 66 that are off the beaten path before they were made so popular, and even parts of like old red brick roads that are patched up in places, or tracks that just seem to go off into being absorbed into another road or part of history. And many bridges that just disappear or get absorbed into other parts of scenery. And you're like, oh, I wonder where that went before. And there's a reason why it's called the Devil's Highway. So what happened at the Whale is taken there. I slept up in the top level of the Whale. There's a creepy orange light up there, and I had an epiphany up there because I was thinking of how Jonah felt being stuck in the belly of the whale or some type of water beast. Jonah, I have a lot of respect for, though. He's my favorite character in the Bible because he wasn't in a whale, he was in the Leviathan. So in my time that I had spent being stuck up in the whale, I'd write things on the walls like a heart with three nails in the heart. You'd look out the circular windows. I'd write things like beautiful up there to remind myself that there was beauty despite being in these like spiritually rotting places, and that I would be spit out of the belly of the beast. And I did have a Bible up in the top part of the blue whale. Now the other part of this area was had reptilian fights on it with the docks and the pond, and those docks are still kept there for a reason in the diving dock, because many fights happen in the water there, and you can see spirits in the water there still, marine spirits. So on the other side of this place, there was an ark boat that was just overflowing with lizards, cages, cage wire, fencing inside of it, nets, ropes hanging down all over inside of this ark, and they would put you inside of this ark, shut the door, and you'd be surrounded by hundreds of reptiles. And the place stunk so bad, it was overwhelming, and it was overflowing with snakes. The smell was just unbearable. And there was glass windows in there, of course, so you couldn't get out of it. The door was locked, you'd have to bust the windows open. Then they had another creature in a back door that was a little wooden door. I had to fight with like a possessed man inside of this ark boat. This ark boat became a desolate place too, and then all the reptiles were eventually released or killed. Some of them scattered into the woods, and you can still hear snakes and other things in the woods out there because they had been left out there and interbred with whatever was left over there at the time. There's also this area that had a circle of mushrooms, and what those were they were real lit up statues that were very psychedelic looking mushrooms that portrayed different colors. These circle of mushrooms were surrounding a pond, and you'd see like a reptilian come out of the pond at night and chase you through the trails in the woods. Ahead of this trail, there looked like small scattered swamps in various places. 2 telephone poles had fallen over the ponds, and it was this thick brush and maze back there that you didn't want to get tangled into. And you could just hear constant rustling of things in the bushes and overgrown bushes into the woods. So then through these trails in the woods, there'd be these random cages in the trails. And in those random cages, there was like small trees and branches with a bunch of other hanging snakes and hanging reptiles that you'd have to walk past to get it back to the main area where the blue whale was. Then there was a carousel-like area that had a big net around it and a circular cement structure inside. And sometimes it was filled with water and all this murky, like reptile crap and debris in there. Again, very hideous. The smell was overwhelming. This place was just god-awful. Snakes everywhere, crawling everywhere, hissing of reptiles. And that's one sound that you have to block out, is like the hissing of the snake sound. Because anybody that is involved in this type of like serpent or reptilian worship, they're in tune with that frequency of the whispering serpent. So you have to block that out. So you could hear the hissing all over the place, and it was just very demonically overgrown. This place was like an effigy to serpent worship. And this reptilian metal god that is Hasatan from the Garden of Eden times. There was nothing